My daughter-in-law sued me to try and get her hands on my late husband's inheritance, claiming I was losing my mind to Alzheimer's and abusing everyone around me. We have to protect the money, she said. The judge looked at her and said, "Ma'am, this woman is the most respected judge in the city, and you are? I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Catherine Wallace. I'm 60 years old, and for the last 25 years, I've been a judge in the Superior Court of Charleston County. I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal imaginable in my courtroom, but I never imagined the worst would come from my own family. It all started on a Tuesday morning. I had just gotten back from my morning walk when I found the envelope in my mailbox. It was thick, official, with the seal of the civil courthouse. For a moment, I thought it was just another document related to my work, but when I saw my name listed as the defendant, I felt the world drop out from under me. Catherine Wallace versus Sarah Jennings Wallace, I read aloud, my hands trembling slightly. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, the woman I considered the daughter I never had. I sat in my kitchen, my morning coffee growing cold as I read, line by line. Sarah was alleging that I was suffering from severe cognitive decline, that I was abusive to the family, and that I posed a danger to myself and others. She was petitioning the court to declare me mentally incompetent and appoint her and my son David as my legal guardians. The words blurred in front of my eyes. Mentally incompetent, family abuse, a danger to society. Each accusation felt like a slap in the face. How was it possible that the woman I had embraced when David introduced me to her 8 years ago, the same woman who cried on my shoulder when she had marital problems, was now trying to take everything away from me? The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my judicial assistant, Mary Ellen. "Kate, are you okay? You look terrible," she said when I arrived at my office an hour later. I didn't know if I should tell her. For years, I had kept my personal life separate from my work, but this was different. If Sarah succeeded, my 25-year career as a judge would be ruined. "Mary Ellen, I need you to look into something for me," I finally said, handing her a copy of the documents. "But this stays between us." I watched her expression change as she read. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with indignation. "Your daughter-in-law is doing this? The same one who's always coming in here asking for favors?" Her voice rose with every word. It was true. Sarah had come to my office dozens of times over the years. She always needed something. References for jobs she never kept, recommendation letters for apartments she couldn't afford, connections for business opportunities that invariably failed. And I, like a fool, always said yes. I remembered the last time she was here, just 3 weeks ago. She had arrived with tears in her eyes, saying she and David were going through financial trouble, that David's real estate development business wasn't doing well, and they might lose their house. "Kate, you're the only one who can help us," she had said, taking my hands in hers. "We just need a small loan to get back on our feet." I gave her $20,000 from my savings, money I had been putting away for my retirement. I did it because I loved her, because I trusted her, because I thought that's what family does. Now I understood why she had been so specific about my finances during that conversation. She had asked about my investments, my properties, even my will. I thought she was just concerned for my well-being, like any caring daughter-in-law. How naive I was. "Kate," Mary Ellen's voice brought me back to the present. "This is serious. If she goes forward with this lawsuit, even if she loses, it could permanently damage your reputation." She was right. In the legal world, even baseless accusations can tarnish a career. Rumors spread quickly, and trust, once lost, is nearly impossible to regain. That night, when I got home, I found David waiting for me in my driveway. My 35-year-old son looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze as he nervously fiddled with his car keys. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. "About the lawsuit your wife filed against me?" I replied directly. I had no energy for beating around the bush. David flinched. "You already know." "Of course I know, David. Did you really think you could do this behind my back?" My son sighed deeply, and for the first time in years, I saw the little boy who used to run into my arms when he had nightmares. "Mom, Sarah's worried about you. Lately, you've been different." "Different how?" "More forgetful. Sometimes you repeat the same stories. Last month, you forgot my birthday." I froze. It was true that I'd forgotten his birthday, but it was because I was working on a particularly complex case. As for repeating stories, didn't everyone do that as they got older? "David, I forget things like any 60-year-old. That doesn't mean I'm losing my mind." "Sarah says you've also been aggressive, that you yelled at her the last time she came to visit." I remembered that occasion. Sarah had shown up unannounced, as always, and had started rearranging my kitchen without permission. When I asked her to stop, she accused me of being stubborn and impossible. Yes, I had raised my voice, but who wouldn't be annoyed in that situation? "Your wife is twisting the truth, David, and apparently she's twisting you too." But as I spoke, a small seed of doubt began to grow in my mind. What if they were right? What if I really was losing my faculties and was the last one to notice? David left that night without resolving anything, and I was left alone with my thoughts and my fears. For the first time in decades, I felt truly vulnerable. Sarah had accomplished what no criminal in my courtroom ever had. She had made me doubt myself. But as I lay awake that night, something stronger than fear began to emerge. The same determination that had driven me to become one of the most respected judges in the county. If Sarah wanted a legal battle, she was going to get one. She just didn't know who she was messing with. I couldn't sleep all night. I stayed in the living room, surrounded by photo albums I hadn't opened in years, trying to understand how I had gotten to this point. The images took me back 8 years, to when David first brought Sarah over for dinner. I remember being so excited. David had been in a few serious relationships before, but he'd never brought anyone home. Sarah arrived in a navy blue dress, her hair perfectly styled, and a smile that lit up the entire room. "Mrs. Wallace, David has told me so much about you," she had said, hugging me as if we'd known each other our whole lives. "It's an honor to meet the most respected judge in Charleston." From the very first moment, Sarah made me feel special. She asked about my cases, took an interest in my career, sought my advice on everything. During dinner, she praised my cooking so much that I insisted on giving her my grandmother's recipes. When they left that night, I thought David had found the perfect woman. "I like her," I told David on the phone the next day. "You can tell she loves you and respects family." How wrong I was. In the following months, Sarah became a constant presence in my life. She would show up at my house unannounced, always with some excuse. She was in the neighborhood. She needed a recipe. She wanted my opinion on something. At first, I loved the attention. After years of living alone since my husband died, having someone care about me felt wonderful. "Kate, have you eaten today?" she would ask, checking my refrigerator. "You need to take better care of yourself. David and I worry about you." There was always a subtle criticism wrapped in concern. My dishes were dirty, my house was cluttered, my clothes were out of style. But she said it with such sweetness that I only felt gratitude for having someone who noticed those details. 6 months after their first meeting, David announced they were getting married. Sarah cried with happiness when she asked me to stand in as her mother at the wedding. "My mom died when I was little," she explained through tears. "I always dreamed of having a mother figure at my wedding. Would you do that for me?" Of course, I said yes. Not only that, I insisted on paying for a large part of the wedding. He was my only son, and Sarah had no family who could afford a proper celebration. I spent $40,000 of my savings on that wedding, but seeing them happy was worth every penny. Or so I thought at the time. Looking back now, I can see the signs I ignored. During the wedding preparations, Sarah made all the decisions without consulting me, even though I was paying. When I suggested something, she would say with a condescending smile, "Oh, Kate, you're so traditional. Trust me, I know what's in style." After the wedding, the visits became more frequent and more invasive. Sarah had a key to my house. I had given it to her for emergencies, and she used it freely. She would arrive when I wasn't home and rearrange my things. "I'm just helping," she'd say when I confronted her. "This house is too big for you to manage alone. David and I think you should consider moving somewhere smaller." Gradually, she began to interfere in my decisions. When I mentioned I was thinking about renovating the kitchen, she convinced me it wasn't worth the expense. When I talked about selling some stocks to diversify my investments, she suggested I wait because the market was too volatile. "You're very smart, Kate, but modern finance is complicated. You should let David and me help you with those decisions." The couple's financial problems began in their second year of marriage. First, David's real estate development business needed startup capital. I lent them $50,000. Then, Sarah lost her job at the real estate agency, and they needed help with their mortgage for 6 months. Then it was Sarah's car that broke down, and she needed a new one to look for work more effectively. Each loan was accompanied by tears, hugs, and promises of repayment that never materialized. And I kept giving because I thought that's what families did. "You're so generous, Kate," Sarah would say after each loan. "David and I are so lucky to have you. One day, we'll pay you back for everything when our business takes off." But the business never took off. There was always a new crisis, a new emergency that required my financial intervention. In 5 years, I had loaned them over $200,000 that I never saw again. There were more subtle changes, too. Sarah began to question my decisions more directly. When I forgot to bring a gift to a neighbor's baby shower, she said, "Kate, how could you be so thoughtless? Poor Maria was expecting you to bring something." When I was late to a family dinner because I had to work late on a case, Sarah sighed dramatically. "Kate, you're not as young as you used to be. Maybe it's time to consider retirement before the job affects you more." Each comment was like a drop of poison, so small it was barely noticeable, but cumulative in its effect. Gradually, I began to doubt myself, to second-guess decisions I once made with confidence. The most subtle manipulation came in the last 2 years. Sarah started making comments about my mental health in front of other family and friends. "Kate has been a bit confused lately," she would say to David when she thought I wasn't listening. Yesterday, she told me the same story 3 times. "We're worried about her," she would confess to my sister during family gatherings. "Sometimes she forgets important things. The other day, she left the stove on all night." That had never happened, but when my sister asked me about it, Sarah had already planted the seed of doubt. "Are you sure it didn't happen, Kate? Maybe you just don't remember." Now, sitting in my living room at 3 a.m, surrounded by photographic evidence of 8 years of gradual manipulation, I could finally see the whole pattern. Sarah hadn't come into our lives for love. She had come with a plan that was about to reach its climax with this lawsuit for mental incompetence. But Sarah had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated the woman who had spent 25 years learning to spot liars, manipulators, and con artists in her courtroom. And now, For the first time in years, I felt completely awake. The next day, I arrived at my office with a determination I hadn't felt in years. If Sarah wanted to play dirty, I was going to teach her what a seasoned judge could do when she decided to really investigate. "Mary Ellen," I said to my assistant, "I need you to do something for me, but it must remain absolutely confidential." "Of course, Kate. What do you need?" "I want a full background check on a Sarah Jennings. Everything you can find. Work history, credit history, public records, any legal proceedings she's been involved in." Mary Ellen raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. After working with me for 15 years, she knew that when I asked for something like that, I had my reasons. While I waited for the information, I decided to do my own digging. I started by calling some contacts in the real estate industry where Sarah had supposedly worked. "Sarah Jennings?" said Patricia Vega, a real estate broker I'd known for years. "Yes, she worked here for a few months. We had to let her go." "Why?" Patricia hesitated for a moment. "Kate, you know I don't like to speak ill of anyone, but that woman was trouble. She would lie to clients about properties, inflate prices, and worst of all, we found out she was using confidential client information for her own benefit." My stomach tightened. "What kind of information?" "Personal financial information. She had access to clients' bank statements and tax returns, and we found evidence she was taking notes on their assets. When we confronted her, she claimed she was just being thorough in her work." That same afternoon, Mary Ellen returned with a file that left me breathless. Sarah Jennings wasn't who I thought she was. Her real name was Sarah Miller, and she had legally changed it 5 years before she met David. "Kate," Mary Ellen said, her voice trembling slightly, "you have to see this." The documents revealed a terrifying pattern. Sarah Miller had been married twice before. Her first husband, a man named Robert Chen, had died in a car accident 3 years after marrying her. During the probate process, Robert's family had alleged that Sarah had manipulated the elderly man into changing his will, leaving everything to her instead of his children. The case never went to trial because Sarah accepted an out-of-court settlement, but the documents showed she had received over $500,000. Her second marriage was to a widower named James Anderson. According to the records, James had filed for divorce, alleging emotional abuse and financial manipulation. In his sworn statement, James claimed that Sarah had tried to convince him he was losing his memory and needed help managing his finances. "She made me feel like I was going crazy," James had written in his affidavit. "She would constantly tell me I had forgotten conversations we never had, that I had made promises I never made. Gradually, I started to doubt my own memory. The similarities to my situation were chilling. But the most disturbing part was that James Anderson had died of a heart attack 6 months after filing for divorce, before the case was resolved." "Mary Ellen," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I need you to contact the lawyer who represented James Anderson, and I also want to speak with Robert Chen's children." Over the next few days, I pieced together the true story of the woman who had been living in my home, manipulating my family, and now trying to have me declared incompetent. I called Patricia Chen, Robert's daughter. Her voice broke when I explained who I was and why I was calling. "We knew she would do this again," Patricia told me. "We tried to warn James Anderson's family, but they didn't believe us. They thought we were just bitter about the money." "Tell me about your father," I asked. "My father was a brilliant man, a retired engineer. When he met Sarah, he had just lost my mother after 50 years of marriage. He was vulnerable, lonely. She took advantage of that." Patricia told me how Sarah had gradually, isolated Robert from his children, convincing him that they were only after his money, how she had sown doubts about Robert's mental health, suggesting he needed help making important decisions. In the end, Dad changed his will without telling us anything. When he died, we discovered Sarah inherited everything. But the worst part wasn't the money, Kate. The worst part was that my father's last years were miserable. He believed he was going crazy, that he was a burden to everyone. Patricia's words hit me like a hammer. It was exactly what Sarah was trying to do to me. I also spoke with Michael Anderson, James's brother. His story was even more disturbing. James was my best friend, not just my brother, Michael told me. When he started dating Sarah, at first he seemed renewed, happy, but gradually he changed. He became anxious, insecure. He would constantly ask us if he had said or done things he couldn't remember. And what did you think? At first, we thought maybe it was stress from work or just age. James was 62. But when he finally told us what Sarah was doing, it all made sense. Michael explained how Sarah had been meticulously documenting every small memory lapse of James, every moment of normal confusion. She kept a detailed journal of supposed incidents that she used to prove James was losing his mental faculties. She had pages and pages of notes. Michael continued. Date, time, incident. But when James showed us the journal, we realized that half the things she'd written had either never happened or were taken completely out of context. What happened when he filed for divorce? Michael's voice turned bitter. Sarah fought back. She filed her own petition, alleging that James was mentally incompetent and had developed dementia. She used that journal as evidence. And the judge? The judge ordered a full psychological evaluation. James was scheduled to have it the week after he died. That night, I sat in my study organizing all the information I had gathered. The pattern was clear. Sarah was a predator who specialized in vulnerable older adults. Her method was always the same: gain their trust, isolate the victim, sow doubts about their mental competence, and then strike legally when the victim was most vulnerable. But there was something Sarah hadn't counted on. I wasn't a helpless victim. I was a judge with 25 years of experience, contacts throughout the legal system, and now I knew exactly who she was. The next day, I began making my own notes, every interaction with Sarah, every phone call, every visit. If she wanted to play the documentation game, I was going to show her how it was really played. I also installed discrete security cameras in my house. If Sarah was going to keep using her key to let herself in without permission, I wanted evidence of everything she did while I wasn't there. But my most important discovery came when I contacted the lawyer who had represented James Anderson. He confirmed something I suspected. Sarah had used the exact same lawyer for all 3 cases, a man named Marcus Thorne, who specialized in guardianship and mental incompetency cases. It's interesting you should call, James's lawyer told me when he finally agreed to speak with me. Marcus Thorne contacted me last week asking about legal precedents for mental incompetency cases in older adults, specifically cases involving retired judges. The blood ran cold in my veins. Sarah hadn't just planned this. She had been specifically preparing to go up against someone with my legal background. That night, as I reviewed all the documents spread across my dining room table, I felt a mix of terror and determination. Sarah had made a crucial mistake. She had underestimated my ability to fight back. But I also realized something more terrifying. Sarah hadn't chosen David for love or even for easy money. She had chosen me as her target from the very beginning. David had simply been the way to get to me. And now, for the first time in years, I had to admit I was scared. I couldn't keep the secret any longer. David had a right to know who the woman he had been married to for 8 years really was. but I also knew that presenting him with the truth about Sarah would be like tearing his heart out. I asked him to come to my house on a Friday night. Sarah was at one of her business meetings. I now suspected she was probably with Marcus Thorne, planning her next legal move. "David, sit down," I said when he arrived. "We need to talk about Sarah." "Mom, if this is about the lawsuit, I already told you. She's just worried about your well-being." "Her name isn't Sarah," I said bluntly. David looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "What are you talking about?" I handed him the folder with all the documents I had compiled. "Her real name is Sarah Miller. She legally changed it 5 years ago, before she met you." I watched the color drain from his face as he leafed through the papers. His hands trembled when he reached the photographs of Sarah's 2 previous husbands. This can't be real," he muttered. "David, look at me," I said, taking his hands in mine. "Your wife is a professional con artist. She specializes in vulnerable older men. You're not her target. I am." "No." David shook his head violently. "This is impossible. Sarah loves me. We've been married for 8 years. And how much of my money have you borrowed in those 8 years? David fell silent. We both knew the answer. "Over $200,000, I continued. "Money you've never paid back and have no intention of repaying." "Mom, all young couples go through financial struggles. That doesn't mean Sarah is a con artist? A murderer?" The words came out harsher than I intended. David stood up abruptly. "A murderer? Mom, now you're really delusional." "Sit down and let me finish," I said in the voice I used in my courtroom. 2 men have died after meeting your wife, both at convenient times for her. I explained everything: Robert Chen and his death after changing his will, James Anderson and his heart attack just before the psychological evaluation that would have proven his mental competence. "They're coincidences," David insisted, but his voice sounded less convinced. "Really? And is it also a coincidence that she used the same lawyer for all 3 cases? That she followed the exact same pattern with you and me?" I showed him the notes Sarah had been taking on my supposed moments of confusion. David recognized them immediately. He had seen them on Sarah's desk at home. "She told me she was taking them because she was worried about you," David mumbled, "to help you remember things better." "David, look at me. Have you ever personally witnessed one of these supposed episodes she describes?" David was quiet for a long moment. "Not directly, but Sarah would tell me about them, like when you forgot to turn off the faucet and flooded the bathroom." "That never happened." "Or when you left your car keys in the refrigerator." "That didn't happen either." "Or when you invited the same neighbors over for dinner twice in 1 week because you forgot the first invitation." "David, I'm starting to think you're the one who needs a mental evaluation if you believe all those lies." The frustration in his voice was palpable. "So, you're saying Sarah made all this up?" "Not only did she make it up, she meticulously documented it to use against me in court." I showed him copies of the journals Sarah Miller had kept on her previous husbands. The patterns were identical. David read in silence for several minutes. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with tears. "How could I not have seen it? Because she's very good at what she does, David. She's had years of practice manipulating good men like you. But if this is true, why did she marry me? I'm a developer. I'm not rich like her other husbands." "Because I am. I was her way into my life." The realization hit David like a slap in the face. "Are you telling me our whole marriage has been a lie?" I didn't know how to answer that question without completely destroying him. "I don't know, son. I just know that her intentions toward me were never genuine." David sank onto the sofa, putting his head in his hands. "What am I going to do?" "First, you're going to help me stop her, and then you're going to decide if you can live with a woman who is capable of this. At that moment, We heard the sound of a key in the front door. Sarah was back. "David, what are you doing here so late?" Sarah asked as she walked into the room, her eyes immediately fixed on the documents scattered across the coffee table. "What is all this?" David couldn't even look at her. Sarah walked over and picked up one of the papers. It was a copy of her original birth certificate with the name Sarah Miller clearly visible. The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. "Where did you get this?" "It doesn't matter where," I said, standing up to face her. "What matters is that we know exactly who you are now." Sarah stood tall, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw her true personality. The sweetness vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had lost all pretense of innocence. "You don't? So you didn't know a Robert Chen or a James Anderson?" Sarah glanced quickly at David, gauging how much he knew. "David, honey, what has this woman been telling you?" "Don't talk to me like I'm a child," David exploded, finally finding his voice. "Is it true? Were you married before?" "That was a long time ago. It has no relevance to our life now." "Twice?" David pressed. "And both husbands died leaving you money?" "People die, David. That doesn't mean I had anything to do with it." "And the mental incompetency lawsuit you filed against me, is that also irrelevant?" Sarah changed tactics immediately. Her eyes filled with fake tears, and her voice became brittle. "David, I'm trying to protect your family. Your mother is losing her mental faculties. Can't you see that? She's paranoid, making up conspiracies about me. This is exactly the kind of behavior I'm worried about." "Am I making up that you changed your name from Sarah Miller to Sarah Jennings?" "People change their names for many reasons. Maybe I wanted a fresh start after losing my first husbands." "Am I making up that you kept a journal of my supposed episodes of confusion?" "I was documenting my concerns to show to a doctor." "Am I making up that your lawyer specializes in mental incompetency cases?" For the first time, Sarah hesitated. I sought out the best lawyer I could find. David stood up slowly. "Sarah, look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Did you ever really love me?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, all pretense was gone from her voice. "Love is a luxury not all of us can afford, David." That admission was like a dagger to my son's heart. I watched him break in front of my eyes. "Get out," David said, his voice cracking. "Get out of my mother's house right now." "David, you can't believe the lies of this senile woman." "Get out," David yelled with a force I didn't know he had. Sarah looked at both of us, calculating her options. Finally, she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "This isn't over," she told me before she left. "The lawsuit is still on, and now I have even more evidence of your paranoia and erratic behavior." The door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the house. David collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. "Mom," he said through his tears, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never imagined." "I know, son," I said, hugging him. "But now that we know the truth, we can fight this together." But as I comforted my broken son, I couldn't shake Sarah's final words. She was right about one thing. This wasn't over. In fact, it had probably just truly begun. 3 weeks after Sarah walked out of my house that night, I received the official notice. The hearing to determine my mental competency was scheduled for Thursday, March 15th at 9 a.m. in courtroom 3B of the Charleston County Civil Court, the very same courtroom where I had presided over hundreds of cases during my career. The irony was not lost on me. David had temporarily moved into my guest room after finding Sarah packing her most valuable belongings and emptying their joint bank account. My son was devastated, but also determined to help me fight the woman who had destroyed his life. "I can't believe I was so blind," he repeated to me every day as we reviewed the legal documents. Sarah is a professional, David. She makes a living deceiving good people. We had hired Eleanor Morales, one of the best defense attorneys in the state, for guardianship cases. Eleanor was 45, brilliant and fierce in court, but even she admitted the case would be challenging. Kate, the problem is that Sarah has extensive documentation, Eleanor explained during one of our prep meetings. 8 years of detailed notes, David's past statements about your supposed confusion, and now she can add paranoid behavior after what happened when you discovered her real identity. But all that documentation is based on lies. We have to prove that, and it won't be easy. Eleanor's strategy was threefold. First, to prove my current mental competence through independent psychological evaluations. Second, to expose Sarah's pattern of fraudulent behavior. And third, to present evidence of her financial motives. We also have an advantage, Eleanor added with a smile. The judge assigned to the case is Robert Vasquez. You worked with him for years before he was appointed to the bench. That reassured me a little, but I knew Robert would have to be completely impartial, especially when it came to me. The days leading up to the hearing were the most difficult of my life. I underwent a full battery of psychological and neurological tests, memory exams, cognitive tests, personality assessments, all to prove something I knew to be true, that I was perfectly sane. The results were categorical. Dr. Francis Herrera, a forensic neuropsychologist, concluded that my cognitive function was above average for my age, with no signs of dementia or mental deterioration. Judge Wallace, he told me after reviewing all the tests, you have the brain of a 40-year-old. Anyone questioning your mental competence is either misinformed or has ulterior motives. But I knew Sarah wouldn't be idle. Through David, who maintained limited contact with her to gather information, we learned she had been contacting neighbors, old friends, even colleagues from my work, trying to find someone to corroborate her allegations about my supposed decline. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, reviewing everything I had discovered about Sarah, mentally organizing the arguments Eleanor would present, but also thinking about something else, about how this woman had been manipulating not just my money, but my very perception of myself for years. I got up and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The eyes that stared back were those of a strong, intelligent, competent woman, not someone who was losing her mind. Sarah had tried to make me doubt what I saw in that mirror, but she couldn't anymore. On the day of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. Eleanor was already there, reviewing her notes one last time. "Ready?" she asked. "I've been preparing for this for 25 years, I replied. When we walked into courtroom 3B, I immediately recognized several people. There was Marcus Thorne, Sarah's lawyer, a thin man in his 50s with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Next to him was Sarah, dressed conservatively, a perfectly rehearsed expression of concern on her face. David was there too, sitting on the defense side, and to my surprise, I saw Mary Ellen in the gallery, along with Dr. Herrera and Patricia Chen, Robert Chen's daughter, who had flown in from Charlotte to testify. Judge Robert Vasquez entered the courtroom with the solemnity the moment required. He was a man my age, with completely gray hair and a presence that commanded respect. When his eyes met mine for a moment, I saw a flash of recognition, but his expression remained completely professional. "Good morning," Judge Vasquez began. "We are here for the hearing in the case of Wallace versus Wallace regarding the petition for guardianship due to mental incompetence. Mr. Thorne, you may proceed with your opening." Marcus Thorne rose with confidence. "Your Honor, we are here today because a family is concerned about its matriarch. Catherine Wallace, age 60, has shown progressive signs of cognitive decline that put her and her family at risk. Thorne began presenting Sarah's evidence: the detailed journal of my supposed lapses, David's previous statements about my erratic behavior, and what he called my recent paranoia, demonstrated by my baseless accusations against Sarah. Mrs. Wallace is not seeking personal gain, Thorne continued. She simply wants to ensure that Judge Wallace receives the care and supervision she needs to protect her interests and well-being. When it was Eleanor's turn, she rose with a calm that radiated confidence. Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of mental decline, but a case of elaborate fraud. Mrs. Sarah Wallace, whose real name is Sarah Miller, is a professional con artist who has specialized in targeting vulnerable older adults. Eleanor methodically presented all the evidence we had gathered: Sarah's false identity, her previous marriages, the convenient deaths of her husbands, and the identical pattern of mental incompetence accusations. Judge Wallace is not losing her mental faculties, Eleanor declared. She is the victim of a systematic campaign of psychological manipulation designed to make her doubt her own sanity. Thorne's first witness was Sarah herself. She approached the stand with a hesitant step, as if it pained her to have to testify against someone she loved. Mrs. Wallace, Thorne began, can you describe some of the incidents that concern you regarding Judge Wallace? Sarah spoke in a broken voice about my supposed forgetfulness, my growing aggression, and my recent paranoia. Her performance was perfect, a concerned daughter-in-law who only wanted what was best for her mother-in-law. But when Eleanor rose for the cross-examination, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted completely. Mrs. Miller, Eleanor began, deliberately using her real name, is it true that you legally changed your name from Sarah Miller to Sarah Jennings 5 years ago? Objection, Thorne jumped up. Irrelevant. Overruled, Judge Vasquez replied. The witness will answer. Sarah hesitated. Yes, I changed my name. And is it true that you were married to a man named Robert Chen, who died leaving you an inheritance of $500,000? That was a long time ago. And you were also married to James Anderson, who died while you were in the process of a divorce after he accused you of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. This time, Sarah was silent for several seconds. The circumstances were different. Eleanor continued to methodically destroy Sarah's credibility, presenting evidence after evidence of her fraudulent pattern of behavior. Mrs. Miller, is it true that you hired the same lawyer, Marcus Thorne, for all 3 incompetency cases you have filed? He's a good lawyer. And is it true that you keep a detailed journal of Judge Wallace's supposed episodes of confusion, just as you kept similar journals about your previous husbands? Sarah's composure finally cracked. I am trying to help this family. Help or exploit, Eleanor pressed. Objection. Sustained, but the damage was already done. The courtroom had seen the real Sarah. When Eleanor finished her cross-examination, Sarah returned to her seat, visibly shaken. She was no longer the concerned daughter-in-law. She was an exposed woman. The next witness was David. Marcus Thorne tried to use him to corroborate Sarah's allegations, but David was well prepared. It's true that my wife told me about supposed episodes of my mother's confusion, David testified, but I now realize I never personally witnessed any of these episodes. I trusted my wife's testimony, which was a mistake. When Eleanor questioned David, he was devastatingly honest about how Sarah had manipulated him into doubting me. My mother is the most intelligent and competent woman I know, David declared. I was a fool for letting someone convince me otherwise. The final witness was Dr. Herrera, who presented the results of my psychological evaluations. In my professional opinion, he concluded, Catherine Wallace is in full control of her mental faculties. Any suggestion of mental incompetence is completely unfounded. When the hearing concluded, Judge Vasquez retired to deliberate. We waited in silence for 45 minutes that felt like an eternity. When he returned, his expression was serious but clear. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented today," he began. "It is clear to this court that Mrs. Catherine Wallace is fully mentally and legally competent. The petition for guardianship is denied." Then he did something unexpected. He looked directly at Sarah. "Furthermore, this court finds sufficient evidence of fraud and perjury to refer this case to the district attorney's office for possible criminal prosecution." Sarah stood up abruptly and ran out of the courtroom, followed by Marcus Thorne. I had won. But more importantly, I had won back something Sarah had tried to take from me, my confidence in myself. 6 months after the hearing, I was sitting in my backyard, enjoying a morning coffee, when David arrived with news I had been waiting for. "Mom," he said with a smile I hadn't seen on his face since before he met Sarah, "they just arrested Sarah." The coffee caught in my throat. "Really?" The DA followed Judge Vasquez's recommendation. They charged her with fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. Apparently, after our hearing, Patricia Chen and Michael Anderson came forward with new evidence of their own. David sat next to me on the garden bench we had installed the week before. They arrested Marcus Thorne, too. It seems he knew exactly what Sarah was doing and had been helping her for years. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice was finally being served, but sadness that David had to go through all of this to get here. "How are you feeling?" I asked him. David sighed deeply, relieved, furious, ashamed, all at the same time. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. Sarah is a professional manipulator." "Yes, I do," David insisted. "I allowed her to manipulate me into doubting you. I failed you when you needed me most." I took his hand in mine. "David, look at me. You did the right thing in the end. When you saw the evidence, you stood up for me. That's what matters." The last 6 months had been a period of healing for both of us. David had filed for divorce immediately after the hearing and had started therapy to process the trauma of being manipulated for 8 years. I had also been seeing a therapist, Dr. Rose Martinez, to process everything that had happened. At first, I didn't think I needed it, but Eleanor had recommended I go. "Kate," Dr. Martinez had told me during one of our first sessions, "you have been the victim of systematic psychological abuse for years. That leaves scars, even on someone as strong as you." She was right. For months after the hearing, I would wake up in the middle of the night questioning my own decisions, wondering if I had really done or said the things Sarah had documented in her fake journal. The psychological damage from Sarah's gaslighting had been deeper than I wanted to admit. But gradually, with the help of therapy and David's unwavering support, I had regained my self-confidence. I had also regained something else, the ability to trust my own judgment about people. "There's something else," David continued. "The investigation revealed that Sarah had other targets besides us." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" Apparently, she had been cultivating relationships with at least 3 other widowers in the Charleston area. One of them, a man named Edward Preston, had already changed his will to include her as a beneficiary. My blood ran cold. "Is he okay?" "He is, thanks to Sarah being arrested before she could complete her plan." I didn't want to think about what that meant, but we both understood the implications. "David, did Sarah ever tell you why she chose me specifically?" David hesitated. "Yes. During one of the final interviews before her arrest, she said she had researched retired female judges because she thought it would be harder for you to seek legal help due to your professional pride. The irony was that Sarah was partially right. My professional pride had initially stopped me from seeking help. I thought I could handle the situation alone, just as I had handled complicated cases for years in my courtroom. But she was wrong about one important thing, David added. She completely underestimated your ability to fight back when you finally decided to. In the weeks following Sarah's arrest, more details began to emerge about the extent of her crimes. The investigation revealed she had been operating her scheme for at least 15 years, much longer than we had imagined. Robert Chen and James Anderson had not been her first victims. There had been at least 2 other men before them, both in other states. The police believed Sarah had been moving geographically to prevent patterns from being established. We'll likely never know the full scope of what she did, Detective Lisa Rodriguez, who was leading the investigation, explained to me. But we estimate she stole at least $2 million over the years. We also discovered that Marcus Thorne was running a whole network of these types of frauds. Sarah wasn't his only client. The police had at least 6 similar active cases in different Florida counties. It's possible they targeted more than 50 older individuals in the last 10 years, Detective Rodriguez continued. Your case was the one that helped us expose the entire operation. That information gave me a strange sense of purpose. Though I had been victimized, my willingness to fight had prevented Sarah and Thorne from hurting more people. A month after the arrest, I received an unexpected call. It was Patricia Chen. "Kate," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I wanted to thank you. Because of your courage in exposing her, we're finally going to get justice for my father." Patricia told me that the investigation had uncovered evidence that Sarah had been drugging Robert Chen with medications that affected his memory and judgment during the last months of his life. We could never prove it before, but they found the drugs in the house Sarah had shared with James Anderson. Apparently, she kept a full kit for her operations. The information was nauseating, but also vindicating. All the men Sarah had targeted had been real victims, not men with natural mental decline, as she had claimed. I also received a call from Michael Anderson. "Kate, I don't know how to thank you. For years, I've blamed myself for not doing more to protect James, but your bravery in fighting Sarah helped me understand that he was the victim of a criminal, not a man who was losing his mind. These conversations helped me process my own experience. For months, I had battled feelings of shame for having been so deceived. But speaking with the families of Sarah's other victims, I understood that it wasn't my fault, or theirs. Sarah was a sophisticated predator who had perfected her techniques over years. The fact that she was finally stopped wasn't because she wasn't skilled, but because this time she had targeted someone who had the resources and the determination to fight back. Sarah's trial was scheduled for the following year. The DA told me it would be a strong case, especially with all the evidence we had gathered and the testimony from the other victims' families. "She'll likely get 20 to 30 years in prison," the DA had explained. "At her age, that's a life sentence." Knowing Sarah would never be able to hurt anyone again gave me peace, but it wasn't revenge I felt. It was more a sense of closure, of justice restored. One afternoon, while organizing my study, I found the first letter Sarah had ever written me after she met David. It was a thank you note for making her feel so welcome in the family. "Dear Kate," she had written in her perfect script, "I can't express how grateful I am to have such a wonderful mother-in-law. I hope one day to be the daughter-in-law you deserve." I read those words now with a completely different perspective. In a way, Sarah had been the daughter-in-law I deserved, in the sense that she had been exactly the test I needed to prove my own strength. Because in the end, Sarah had accomplished something she never intended. She had proven that at 60 years old, I was still the strong, intelligent woman I had been my entire career. I wasn't losing my faculties. I was gaining wisdom. That night, David came for dinner, as he did every Friday since Sarah's arrest. As we cooked together in my kitchen, I realized we had regained something more valuable than any money Sarah had stolen. We had regained our trust in each other. "Mom," David said as he chopped vegetables for the salad, "there's something I want to tell you." "What is it?" "These past few months, living here with you, watching you fight Sarah and win, it's made me remember why I always admired you so much when I was a kid." His words filled me with emotion. "David, don't. No, let me finish. You're the strongest person I know. And I'm so sorry I ever doubted that, even for a moment." That evening, after David left, I sat in my living room reading a book and enjoying a glass of wine. The house felt different now. It was no longer the place where I had been manipulated and deceived. It was my home again, my sanctuary. Sarah had tried to take my money, my reputation, and my dignity. She had failed on all 3 counts, but more importantly, she had failed in her ultimate goal, to make me doubt who I really was. Because now, at 60 years old, I knew with absolute certainty who Catherine Wallace was. A woman who had survived 25 years in the justice system, who had raised a good man, and who, when faced with the greatest test of her life, had found the wisdom and the courage to fight. And she had won.